Retail was never her dream, but it kept the lights on. In a small town, Walmart was the heartbeat of routine life. The hum of registers, the faint chatter of customers, and the endless task of restocking shelves became her lullaby. Among the regulars who shuffled through the automatic doors, one stood out, a man she and her co-workers dubbed Backpack Guy. Silvery grey hair streaked with brown, towering over her 5'2" frame, his presence felt unnervingly close even from a distance. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above as the young employee knelt in the seasonal section, her fingers brushing against the cold metal shelves. The task was simple, zoning the area, pulling items forward so everything looked neat and orderly. Monotonous, yes, but oddly comforting. The rhythmic sounds of distant beeping registers and muffled conversations blended into the background, a familiar soundtrack to her shifts. She heard the faint squeak of a walker's wheels before she saw him. The air seemed to shift, her senses subtly alerting her to his presence. She glanced up and caught sight of a tall figure looming just at the edge of the aisle. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hood, but there was no mistaking the heavy backpack strapped tightly to his shoulders. LED lights blinked erratically on it, casting small, colorful glows onto the products around him. It was him. Backpack Guy. She managed a polite smile, one she had practiced countless times before. "Hey there," she said, her voice light and friendly despite the unease bubbling in her chest. "How's it going today?" His response was disjointed, fragmented, a jumble of stutters and half-formed thoughts that shifted from one topic to another with no discernible pattern. He scratched his head, muttering about how he'd seen something in the store last week, then abruptly mentioned the weather. She nodded politely, keeping the conversation surface level, all the while returning her attention to the shelves. Then, unexpectedly, he crouched down beside her. "I'll help you," he said, his voice more certain now, as if this was a decision already made. "Oh, no, that's okay," she replied quickly, holding up a hand in polite protest. "You don't have to do that," but he ignored her, gripping the edge of his walker and using it to nudge items forward from the lower shelves. His movements were slow but deliberate, the tools dangling from his backpack clinking softly with each shift of his weight. She froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't doing anything wrong, not technically. Just a helping. But it felt wrong somehow. His presence was too close, too intrusive. "I appreciate it, but I've got it," she insisted, her tone still kind but a little firmer now. He didn't reply. His focus remained on the shelves, his fingers brushing over items as if savoring their texture. Her smile faltered, her body stiffening. She glanced over her shoulder, hoping for another coworker to appear in the aisle. But it was just the two of them, the buzz of the lights suddenly louder in her ears. She stepped back slightly, putting more distance between them. "Really, I can handle it." "Thanks," though he finally straightened, towering over her now. For a moment, his gaze lingered too long, his eyes glassy and unfocused yet oddly piercing. "All right," he mumbled, his voice soft. As he walked away, his backpack blinked erratically, the faint sound of his muttering trailing behind him. She exhaled slowly, a tightness in her chest she hadn't realized was there. Something about him lingered in the air, leaving her with a sense of unease that she couldn't shake. The day was already off to a rough start. She had barely slept, her mind preoccupied with her grandfather's latest trip to the hospital. Her worry manifested as restlessness, but at work, she buried it beneath a professional smile. The repetitive tasks provided a welcome distraction, at least for a while. She found herself zoning the craft section, carefully arranging products and wiping away dust. The store had recently received a shipment of kids' non-toxic paintball supplies, which now cluttered the shelves. The strong chemical odor hung in the air, sour and sharp, making her nose wrinkle. As she adjusted the messy display, her fingers brushed against something sticky. Her heart sank as she pulled her hand back, now smeared with a slimy, yellowish substance that reeked of something rancid. She grimaced, holding her hand out as far from her body as possible. "Gross," she muttered under her breath. She grabbed her radio, calling maintenance to handle the mess. Moments later, she heard the familiar squeak of a walker. "Backpack Guy," she sighed internally but managed a polite nod as he approached. "Hey," she said, keeping her tone light. He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing as he focused on her outstretched hand. "What's that?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity. "Some kind of paint or slime," she replied, suppressing her irritation. "It smells terrible, and I don't want it on my clothes." Before she could stop him, he leaned in closer, sniffing the air around her hand. Her stomach turned, but she froze, unsure how to react. "It does smell bad," he said after a moment, his tone oddly cheerful. Then, without hesitation, he pulled a damp bandana from his pocket. She recoiled instinctively, holding up her clean hand. "You don't have to," but it was too late. He reached for her, his bandana brushing over the sticky substance on her skin. She flinched, a mix of shock and disgust flooding her senses. The bandana was damp, the fabric rough against her skin, and it smelled faintly of mildew. Her protests caught in her throat as she forced herself to stay calm. "Thanks, but really, it's fine. I'll just wash my hands." He didn't seem to notice her discomfort, his focus entirely on wiping away the residue. When he finally stepped back, she forced a nervous smile and muttered a quick, "Thank you." As soon as he turned away, she bolted to the restroom, scrubbing her hands under scalding water until they were red and raw. She could still feel the ghost of his touch, the invasive act lingering in her mind. Back on the floor, she waited with bated breath for maintenance to arrive and clean the mess. Backpack Guy loitered nearby, his presence a constant weight. Her unease had deepened, her instinct screaming that something was off. From that moment, her interactions with him were no longer innocent. She kept her guard up, always watching, always waiting. The tension between them had shifted, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker lay beneath his awkward demeanor. The day was heavy with tension. Her grandfather was back in the hospital again. She carried the weight of worry with her into work, hiding it behind a forced smile and the monotony of routine. The hardware department was her escape, a quiet corner where she could focus on tasks and let her mind drift from her anxieties. But the escape was short-lived. The familiar squeak of a walker broke her concentration. She looked up to see Backpack Guy approaching, his usual awkward smile in place. She steeled herself, hoping this would be another fleeting interaction. "How's your day going?" he asked, his tone unusually calm. "It's all right," she lied, trying to keep her voice neutral. But her thoughts betrayed her, and she found herself adding, "My grandfather's in the hospital again." "It's been a tough day." His expression changed. His smile faded into something more serious, almost calculating. "What hospital is he in?" he asked. Her heart skipped a beat. The question was too direct, too personal. Alarm bells went off in her mind. "I don't know," she lied quickly. "My mom called me while I was at work." She didn't say. He nodded slowly, his eyes searching hers as if trying to discern the truth. Then he offered, "If you need to get to him, I have a car. I can take you." The pit in her stomach deepened. "No, that's okay," she said, forcing a smile. "He'll be fine. I just get nervous, you know." Before she could say more, her manager appeared, her presence an unspoken lifeline. "I need you in the back," she said firmly, cutting through the tension. She didn't hesitate, leaving Backpack Guy behind as her unease grew. Something about him felt wrong, more wrong than ever before. It was Halloween season, her favorite time of year. The store was alive with vibrant decorations, plastic skeletons, and candy displays stacked high. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to enjoy the festive atmosphere as she walked through the aisles, clipboard in hand. But her excitement was dampened when she spotted Backpack Guy lingering near the stationery section. He was pacing, his bulky frame seeming more ominous under the dim store lights. His walker squeaked with every step, and he muttered under his breath, loud enough to be heard but unintelligible. She ignored him, focusing instead on her conversation with Liz, the temporary manager of the crafts and stationery sections. Liz was kind but firm, giving her a rundown of the tasks that needed attention. Together, they walked the aisles, discussing what should be prioritized. Backpack Guy hovered at the end of the aisle, his presence an unwanted shadow. He peeked at them, his eyes narrowed, before retreating. "Do you know that guy?" Liz asked, her voice low and cautious. She hesitated, then nodded. "He's around a lot. He makes me uneasy." Liz's face darkened. "Be careful with him. He's been warned about bothering people before." Her heart sank, but she nodded, grateful for Liz's concern. After their conversation ended, Liz moved on, leaving her to start her tasks. She felt exposed as Backpack Guy began circling her section, his presence becoming impossible to ignore. The first time, he passed by casually, muttering to himself. The second time, he slowed down, watching her from a distance. His eyes were sharp, his expression unreadable. The third time, he stopped entirely. "How are you?" he asked abruptly, breaking the silence. She glanced up, trying to remain composed. "Fine," she replied, keeping her focus on the shelves. His tone shifted, growing more probing. "Has anyone been saying things about me?" Her chest tightened. "No," she lied quickly, avoiding eye contact. He stepped closer, his presence heavy and intrusive. You sure? People like to talk, she nodded, forcing a smile, but her instinct screamed at her to get away. She moved to another section, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. Well, he said after a pause, how about I give you a hug? Panic surged through her veins. No, she said firmly, stepping back. He laughed, a sound that chilled her to the bone. Come on, just a hug. Before she could react, he reached out, his hand brushing against the bare skin of her neck. The touch was brief but invasive, leaving her frozen in shock. She managed to stammer a nervous laugh, desperate to defuse the moment. I'm fine. Thanks. He stared at her for a moment, then turned and walked away, his laughter echoing faintly as he left. Her legs felt like lead, her heart pounding in her chest. She stumbled toward her supervisor, the words spilling out as she recounted the encounter. This was no longer harmless awkwardness. Backpack Guy had crossed a line, and she knew she couldn't ignore the warning signs any longer. The atmosphere in the store felt heavy, oppressive. Despite the holiday season and the colorful decorations, the weight of Backpack Guy's presence loomed over her like a dark cloud. Days had passed since their last unsettling encounter, but the memory of his touch and the invasive way he lingered wouldn't leave her mind. She kept looking over her shoulder, her instincts on high alert. Today was supposed to be a simple shift. She had tasks to complete in stationery and celebrations, her usual rounds of stocking, organizing, and assisting customers. But when she spotted Backpack Guy near the end of an aisle, her stomach dropped. He was pacing again, his walker creaking as he moved back and forth. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't browsing. He was watching. His movements felt purposeful, calculated, as if he was waiting for the right moment to approach. She tried to avoid him, sticking close to coworkers whenever possible. Liz, her temporary manager, was still in the store and checked in on her occasionally, offering a reassuring presence. But Backpack Guy seemed determined. The first time, he walked past her aisle while she was with Liz, glancing at them briefly before retreating. The second time, she had gone to celebrations to restock party supplies, speaking briefly with Kat, a coworker in the Halloween section. He lingered at the edge of the aisle, his eyes sharp and his expression unreadable. He's doing it again, she whispered to Kat, keeping her voice low. Kat frowned. Be careful. He's been banned before, but they don't enforce it much. Just don't let him corner you. Her heart raced. The third time, he didn't walk past. He came straight to her. She was alone, focusing on organizing a shelf, when his voice cut through the air. How are you? He asked, his tone unnervingly calm. Fine, she replied, not looking at him, hoping he'd get the hint, but he didn't. He stepped closer, invading her space. Has anyone been saying things about me? He asked, his voice low but insistent. She felt trapped. No, she said quickly, trying to maintain a neutral tone. You sure? He pressed yes, she replied, her voice firmer. The air between them grew tense. Then, out of nowhere, he said, how about I give you a hug? Her breath hitched. No, she said sharply, stepping back. He laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was something darker. Come on, he said, moving closer, his arms reaching out. She recoiled, panic setting in as his hand brushed her arm. The contact felt wrong, invasive, and her body tensed as her then backed off, laughing as he walked away. Shaking, she rushed to find her supervisor, recounting everything with a trembling voice. This time, she refused to stay silent. This time, she knew she had to take action. The encounter had shaken her to her core, but she wasn't going to let it slide. Backpack Guy had crossed too many lines, and she was determined to make sure he didn't get another opportunity. Her steps were unsteady as she approached her supervisor, but her resolve was firm. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice tight with emotion. Her supervisor immediately noticed her distress. She gestured for her to follow her into the break room, away from the prying eyes of customers. Once inside, the floodgates opened. She recounted everything, the way Backpack Guy had lingered, the invasive questions, his attempts to hug her, and the uncomfortable touch. Her supervisor listened intently, her expression darkening with every word. You did the right thing coming to me, she said firmly. We need to escalate this. Together, they spoke to the front-end manager, who took her statement seriously. The manager asked her to recount not only this incident but any previous encounters she'd had with Backpack Guy. She shared what she knew, including the rumors from coworkers about his behavior and the disturbing stories of him showing inappropriate images to others. Her coworker, the young woman who had shared her own experience with Backpack Guy, was called in to corroborate the claims. Though hesitant at first, she spoke up, adding weight to the growing case against him. The front-end manager assured them that steps would be taken to ensure their safety. The company had procedures in place to address these situations, and they intended to follow them. As she left the office, she felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. Speaking up was hard, but she had done it. Now, she could only hope it would be enough to keep him away for good. The following days felt surreal. She had spoken up, but the lingering tension in the air told her the story wasn't over. Despite the manager's promises, she couldn't help but feel vulnerable. The store's open layout, with aisles that seemed to stretch forever, felt less like a place of work and more like a maze where danger could lurk around every corner. Word of her report spread among her co-workers. Some offered words of support, while others seemed unsure, caught between dismissing Backpack Guy as a harmless oddity and recognizing the potential threat he posed. She learned from others that he had been seen lingering around the store since her report, despite being unofficially banned. Her supervisor kept a close eye on her shifts, checking in regularly. Liz, the temporary manager, seemed even more protective than before. Even so, every time she clocked in, her stomach twisted into knots, unsure if Backpack Guy would appear again. One evening, the tension reached its peak. As she stocked shelves in hardware, she saw him through the corner of her eye. He was outside the store this time, pacing near the automatic doors, his walker in tow. He hadn't entered, but his presence alone made her blood run cold. She hurried to her supervisor, her voice shaking as she explained what she'd seen. Her supervisor immediately contacted security and the front-end manager. A call was made to the local police. It was clear now that this situation had escalated beyond the store's ability to handle. When the police arrived, they spoke with Backpack Guy outside. From a distance, she watched as he gestured wildly, his erratic behavior on full display. Though he wasn't arrested, he was officially warned not to return to the store. The police assured the managers that they would follow up if he violated the warning. The sight of him being escorted off the property filled her with a cautious relief. It wasn't a perfect resolution, her fear didn't vanish overnight, but it was a step toward reclaiming her sense of safety. That night, as she left the store, she felt a small glimmer of hope. The system had taken her concerns seriously, and she had taken a stand for herself and her co-workers. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about ensuring no one else had to endure what she had. The days that followed Backpack Guy's removal were quieter, but the unease didn't entirely disappear. Though she no longer saw him lurking around the store, his presence felt like a shadow in the back of her mind. Every time the automatic doors slid open, she would glance up instinctively, her heart racing until she recognized the customer. The store management had taken additional precautions after the incident. Security was more visible, stationed closer to the entrances. The front-end manager had even briefed the team during a meeting, reminding everyone to stay vigilant and to report any unusual behavior immediately. It was a comfort to know they were taking things seriously, but it didn't erase the anxiety that lingered. Her co-workers rallied around her, offering support and sharing stories of their own uneasy encounters with Backpack Guy. It was eye-opening and troubling to learn just how many of them had felt uncomfortable but hadn't spoken up. "I wish I'd said something sooner," one of the girls in electronics admitted. Maybe it wouldn't have gotten this far. The weight of those words stayed with her. She had never wanted to be the person to make waves, but now she realized how important it was to speak out. Her actions had sparked a change, a new awareness among her team that safety wasn't something to compromise on. Still, there were moments when the fear crept back in. She found herself avoiding certain aisles, steering clear of secluded areas whenever possible. She stayed close to co-workers during her shifts, using their presence as a shield against the memories of being followed and cornered. Despite it all, she refused to let fear dictate her life. She poured herself into her work, focusing on her tasks and finding comfort in the routine. Slowly, the store began to feel normal again. Customers came and went, holiday decorations transitioned to new seasonal displays, and the rhythm of retail life continued. One evening, as she walked out to her car, the parking lot quiet under the glow of the streetlights, she took a deep breath. The chill in the air was sharp, but it felt cleansing. She wasn't the same person she had been before all this. She was stronger now, more aware of her boundaries and her right to feel safe. Though Backpack Guy's shadow might linger in her memory, it no longer defined her. She had faced her fear and taken control. For now, that was enough.